Is Russia quietly breaching into NATO? Well, according to reports, Russia is quietly expanding a network of drone launch sites close to its borders with Belarus and Ukraine. And according to satellite imagery and leaked documents reviewed by the Telegraph, the scale of this expansion is raising a much bigger question. Could Russia's newest long-range attack drones eventually threaten NATO territory? At least 59 new launch rails have reportedly been identified across 10 Russian military and civilian sites. Some of these locations are already being used to launch attacks against Ukraine. Others appear to be newly constructed or undergoing expansion. The sites include former military facilities, civilian airports, and remote areas that are now being converted into dedicated drone hubs. Drone intelligence company DroneSec analyzed satellite imagery and found that around 20 of the new launch rails are long enough to accommodate Russia's latest long-range drones, and the infrastructure appears designed for scale. At some locations, additional launch rails are still being built. One site reportedly has enough storage capacity for more than 1,000 drones. That matters because Russia has dramatically increased its use of unmanned systems during the war in Ukraine. 7 of the 10 sites identified in the report have reportedly already been used in recent Russian attacks on Ukrainian targets, according to open-source tracking data. So these are not simply theoretical facilities. Some are already part of Russia's active drone campaign, and Moscow's drones are changing too. Russia initially relied heavily on Iranian-designed shahed drones, but it has increasingly developed and produced its own versions under the Geran series. The newer variants are reportedly faster, carry heavier warheads, and can travel hundreds of miles. Leaked Ukrainian government documents reportedly indicate that the Geran 4 and Geran 5 could carry payloads of up to around 90 kilograms. That combination of greater speed, longer range, and heavier payloads creates a growing challenge for air defense systems, and Russia may be experimenting with an even more unusual capability. Ukrainian military intelligence has warned that Moscow is testing the possibility of equipping Geran drones with air-to-air missiles. If successful, such systems could potentially be used against aircraft involved in defending Ukrainian cities. That would represent another evolution in drone warfare. The drones themselves are also becoming harder to treat simply as cheap, expendable weapons. They can be used to overwhelm air defenses, force expensive interceptors to be launched, and expose weaknesses in defensive networks. And Russia is building the industrial infrastructure to sustain this campaign. One of the key production centers is the Alabuga Special Economic Zone, which has become one of Russia's major drone manufacturing hubs. From there, drones can be distributed to launch sites across Western Russia. The geography of these new launch facilities is what is now attracting attention in NATO capitals. Some of the sites are positioned close enough to the borders with Belarus and Ukraine that Russia's newest long-range drones could potentially bring parts of NATO territory into their theoretical range. Poland is particularly significant. Some of the reported launch locations could potentially put Warsaw within range of Russia's newer long-range attack drones. But that does not mean Russia is preparing to attack Poland. There is currently no evidence that Moscow has decided to launch a direct attack against NATO. The concern is about capability, not necessarily intent. The more launch infrastructure Russia builds, the more options it potentially has in a future confrontation. And that could become important if the war in Ukraine expands or if tensions between Russia and NATO escalate. European and US intelligence officials have previously warned that Russia could consider provocative operations against countries such as Poland. These could include attacks against critical infrastructure, sabotage, or false flag operations designed to create confusion over who was responsible. That is where drones become particularly important. A relatively inexpensive unmanned aircraft can potentially cross borders, strike infrastructure, and create disruption without putting a pilot at risk. For NATO, detecting and identifying such threats is therefore becoming increasingly important. The alliance has been expanding its ability to detect, track, and counter drones as unmanned warfare rapidly evolves. Ukraine has already demonstrated how drones can transform a modern battlefield. Russia has used huge numbers of drones against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, often sending waves of unmanned aircraft to saturate air defenses. Ukraine, in response, has developed its own increasingly sophisticated drone network. The result is a effectively an arms race in unmanned warfare, and Russia's expanding launch infrastructure suggests Moscow is preparing for a future in which drones play an even larger role. The key question is what happens next. If these sites remain focused on Ukraine, they will primarily serve Russia's ongoing war effort. But if Moscow eventually decides to confront NATO directly, the same infrastructure could provide additional launch options against alliance territory. That possibility is why Poland is watching closely. The concern is not simply that Russia has built more drone bases. It is that Russia is creating a distributed network with multiple launch points, storage facilities, production links, and increasingly capable weapons. That makes the system harder to disrupt and potentially harder to predict. For NATO, this creates a new strategic challenge. The alliance has traditionally prepared for threats from aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. Now it must also prepare for large-scale attacks involving hundreds or even thousands of relatively inexpensive drones. And the Ukraine war has shown just how quickly that technology can evolve. Russia's new launch network does not prove that Moscow intends to attack NATO, but it does demonstrate that the Kremlin is investing heavily in the infrastructure needed for long-range drone warfare. And if the battlefield in Ukraine has become Russia's testing ground for this technology, NATO may ultimately become the next environment in which Moscow seeks to test the limits of its drone capabilities. For now, the launch rails are aimed primarily toward Ukraine, but their location, scale, and growing capabilities are giving NATO another reason to keep a very close eye on the skies.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.